Welcome back to the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast. Your host, Thomas Keenan, coming at you again with another awesome guest. We've got Jim Beach with us here today. He is, in my opinion, a serial entrepreneur, which we're going to dive into a little bit more here and learn about in a bit. It's funny that I actually hopped on a podcast earlier this week, a live radio station that Jim hosts, which I want to ask him some questions about that because it's not every day that you meet someone who is hosting a live radio show in a podcast format. I think that's very unique. But I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about this gentleman and what he's done to get to where he's at. According to some of the information and profile that he has set up on his website, he's had some pretty banging big businesses in place. This one here is telling us, sir, the first one you had grew to over 700 employees. Let's learn a little bit about you and how you started this thing off and got such a massive company. Because that, in my opinion, you get over that 500 employee mark, you're at a small business.
Well, unfortunately, the revenue was still in the small business category, Tomas, but thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to talking and I appreciate being here. Thanks a lot. It's an honor.
Yes, I appreciate you coming in as well. So let's dive in. What was the 700 employee business the very first one, or what led up to that to get it to that point?
That was my first business, and those weren't all permanent employees. We had temp employees too. I actually have a visual aid here. This is our brochure from year one, 1994. I still have it. You can see we had two locations. We were at Stanford and MIT and started off as a summer camp. I wanted to go back to graduate school and needed some money. And so I decided to start a summer business, and I made a list: pool cleaning and landscaping and summer camps. And I didn't really want to work outdoors and get all sweaty and hot and stuff. And so I chose summer camps, and I summer camped as a kid. I decided to blatantly copy one of those, and I did. It was a computer camp. I was at computer camp in the 70s, as dorky as that sounds. And in the 90s, we recreated that, except at Stanford, MIT, Georgetown, UCLA, SMU, Cambridge, Sorbonne, Oxford, University of Adelaide, all over the world, teaching kids basic computer skills all the way up through advanced HTML and recursion programming, C++, back in the 90s. And it was an amazing success. The kids loved it. And we grew to 89 locations. I have the camp t-shirt from that year. It was designed to look like a rock shirt.
Yeah.
Like a rock concert with all of the locations that we were working at. And it was a great model. And I didn't know this, but it sort of proved my philosophy and what I'm sort of all about today. It was a blatant copy of somebody else's business. I didn't take any trademarks or violate any patents or anything like that. I was legal, but I was purely a copy. And if you want to get how detailed I copied, his program started Sunday at 3:00. My program started Sunday at 3:00. Yeah. His was called National Computer Camp. I was American Computer Experience. So I copied him. Except I iterated it and did it a lot better. His was at Clark Crest Resort in Connecticut. Mine was at Stanford and an MIT and things like that. And we had global gaming competitions and had amazing partnerships with all of the major tech players were sponsors. Every company that you can think of, Lego, and all of them, NASA, everybody. And so we just did it a lot better. Started that business for under $1,000, made $56,000 the first year, and had enough money to keep it going. Our expenses and our revenue were $56,000. We had an exact match that first year at 2 locations, able to go to 6 locations the next year, 37, 45, and then 89, that kind of a progression. And I was not passionate for the business. I was excited to get out of it. Summer camping is a tough business in terms of I was responsible for lots and lots and lots of kids, and at night I would lay there and wait for the phone to ring for something bad to happen, because it usually did. Because if you have 89 locations operating and one of them has a broken arm, I still have an issue to deal with. So
Yeah.
that was my first run at it.
Hmm. So what was the biggest lesson you learned in that first company?
What I've already alluded to, that you don't have to be creative. If you want to be an entrepreneur, find an idea and copy, borrow, or steal it. That you can start almost any business for under $5,000. And people say, well, I want to start XYZ and it cost $1 million. Well, maybe you shouldn't start XYZ then. Maybe you should start something that you can afford. And a lot of us guys want to have a bar or a restaurant. And everyone says you can't start a bar or a restaurant for under $1 million. The richest bar owner I know started his first bar, for $2,000-3,000. That's all he had.
Hmm.
But he got it up and running. And Tomas, this is an amazing story. He didn't have enough money the first weekend to have kegs. He only had pop tops and stuff like that. That's all he could afford.
Yeah.
But you know what? He stayed in business and made enough money that weekend to get a keg the second weekend,
Hmm.
and he never had any debt, didn't have all of the capital expense to pay off. A guy moved in across the street and built one of those, the Taj Mahal of beer brewing places with the big brass things and all of that. Spent $2 million to get it started. And it's a very simple question. How many beers do you have to sell to repay that stuff
Yeah.
at the front door? You got to sell millions of beers before you're even at break even. And my friend Joey, who started for $2,000, he was in the black weekend too.
Yeah.
And so I just love that model. And then I have a different view on passion. I'm passionate about being an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
End of story. I don't care what I sell. I don't care what the service is. It doesn't matter to me. I've done purses, I've done leather jackets, painted leather jackets, a lot of products that I would never use. I have had businesses in,
Hmm.
because all I want out of it is the lifestyle, the freedom, the opportunity to grow, to set my own direction.
Hmm.
That to me is worth not working for the man. And so
Yeah.
when everyone says you have to be passionate about what you do and what your business is, I really want to change that conversation, because people say, "Oh, I have to be passionate about my hair salon, and it's only going to succeed if I'm passionate about hair." No, you can be. Well, see, I'm not passionate about hair. You don't have to be passionate about the business.
Yeah.
Just the fact that I don't work for you is enough. And so I want to change the discussion of passion a little bit.
Sure.
And those are my lessons.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's a really good lesson to learn, different perspective. You say you don't have to be passionate about what it is you do. However, you are passionate, and you are passionate, like you said, about entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is a very large blanket. I mean, that could be e-commerce, could be in the oil industry, could be selling cars, you name it. So, you're probably looking at, let's say you go to look into either acquire a business or start a new one. What are some of the things that you're going to look for that are currently in place or that will potentially be in place that consider it a good opportunity for you?
I look at the startup costs, and if I already know who I'm going to sell it to,
Mhm.
if those two things are there, if it can be started for very little money, if I figure a path, and there should already be a customer apparent, so if those are in place, I'm willing to take the next step and to see if I
Mhm.
can go out there and stick my toe in the water and test it and see, if it's going to have any market potential at all.
Sure.
I had a furniture company one time. We built Killam chairs out of Pakistan.
Mhm.
There's a long backstory about why I started that business. It was a bet, but the long and short of it is I had sent out, I had one made, and we took a picture of it and sent it a postcard to 5,000 interior decorators. Are you interested in this product? And
Mhm.
I had 50 or 60 telephone calls back from that one picture. And so I've spent $400 to have one share built, and maybe $600-700 to get all of the flyers and the postcards in the mail and stuff. A little
Yeah.
more than that, maybe $1,500. But for $2,000, I have a firm indication that there's market demand for my product, and I already have a marketing list.
Yeah.
I've already got 50 potential customers to call back when my website goes live with 30 shares to choose from.
Yeah.
And so for very little money, I've already accomplished a tremendous amount.
Mhm.
And if that step works, well, then you go to the next step,
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been taught that methodology too from some of the mentors and coaches I've hired over the years, and it's been termed or called the lean-in method for me.
Sure.
And it's something that I use myself every so often. So I held my first in-person event last November 2022, and I said, you know what? Before
Those
I
are
go and
hard to do
invest,
lean.
they are. Before I go and invest 20 grand into an event, like I have to ensure that there's a want in the marketplace, and I have to ensure that I'm going to be able to fill seats at the event. Cool. So I use the lean-in method, and fortunately today, yes, postcard or mailers is something that is 100% coming back into the marketing space, which I'm seeing, and I've got a colleague who's heavily invested over there. But I went to what most people in my age demographic are doing right now. I went to social media. I posted on my personal profiles and some of the Facebook groups that I'm involved in that are around business. Hey, if I were to host an event around, not necessarily the rah, let me go, boost your endorphins. If I was to host an event around actually helping you, tactically helping you on the back end operations of your company, would you be interested? And the feedback that I got was so much and so great that I said, this is a no brainer. And at that point, it was worth me rolling the dice and investing the money, and then basically selling the tickets to go fill the event. But it's definitely a great methodology. I think that anybody who's in business or is considering going into a business should do.
There's just, as an entrepreneur, there's no other way. I had an entrepreneur yesterday or so that I met on the show, and he was talking about raising $200 million to start his business.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not the ball game that I'm playing in.
Sure.
I'm not in the New York City financial market
Mm-hmm.
type thing. And he was raising money to go and buy entire, 50-story skyscrapers and things like
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
That's not where I'm playing, and most of us are not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have, if we're lucky, $5,000 saved up to try to start our business, and that's
Yeah.
who I want to talk to.
Yeah. I love it. So let's dive into starting the business, right? You got School for Startups, right? Which is one of your companies. What is the process or the steps that you believe are the correct order in actually starting a new business from scratch?
That's a fun question. I have a joke that I tell that's actually comes from a true story, that you shouldn't do anything until you're required. Even like getting the form or the LCC for the new business isn't necessary until you want a bank account. The only
Mm-hmm.
reason you need an LLC is to get the bank account, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the business name. And so I've had stories or done things where I would take the check to the bank and know the banker well enough to say, go ahead and let me start it. I promise I'll bring in the paperwork next week. I promise. And then 45 days later, she calls and says, Jim, you still owe me that LLC paperwork. When are you going to bring it in? I truly believe in doing something that is only needed to be done. And if it's not needed to be done,
Mm-hmm.
don't do it.
Yeah.
So don't get your LLC first. That's what a typical book would say. I say
Yeah.
probably that's the 20th step
Mm.
or something. My goal is to have a check in my hand that I cannot cash, because it ain't, I got to do the back end stuff to make it work, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing I'm going to do is have an idea
Mm-hmm.
and see if I like that idea. I'm going to talk to as many people as I can and see if they like the idea. And then probably I'll put it down on a one sheet piece of paper with bullet points, spend an hour on
Mm-hmm.
it so that I can, it's actually there. And that step actually helps, even for us back of the envelope people. The putting it down at least on one sheet of paper helps.
Yeah.
How are you going to pay for it? Who's the marketing? Who's the target audience? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I'm probably going to do a couple of logistics. If I'm doing a service business, say I'm going to run an event, like you said, maybe you need to do some research and find out the cost of the venue, and are there venues available
Mm-hmm.
in next January, or do I literally have to wait a year and a half, like for a wedding venue? If you want a wedding on a Saturday,
Yeah.
In a good
Can't
place, you're
wait.
going to have to wait a year and a half, right?
Mm.
Just the basics understanding like that. I had to call Stanford and MIT and say, hey, can I run a camp there first? And then you want to start taking that to the market and see
Mm.
if you can go out there and get people to actually say yes to it. So for my summer camp business, the very first thing that we did was get an 800 telephone number.
Mhm.
I then got an ad in the Palo Alto Parent Magazine and one in the Boston Parenting Magazine. That's $450 each. Ran those with the 800 number and then waited around to see if the 800 number would ring.
Mhm.
And one of our silly little stories is we didn't have any answers to any of the questions. So we didn't answer the phone because I was afraid to answer the phone.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm 24. No, I've never done this before.
Yeah.
No, I don't know the answer to that. We'll figure that out later. So we just let the messages pile up.
Mm.
And when I got 30, I was like, you know what? I better make a brochure and mail it to those people. And so then I went and actually made that brochure that I showed you at Kinko's and spent $500 to get 500 of those printed
Yeah.
and mailed it to them. And then every day I would pray that there would be something in the mailbox, an actual $100 deposit check,
Mhm.
right? So it's all about going to the marketplace just as soon as you can with as small an offering as possible and
Mhm.
seeing how many bites you can get, just like you did with your event, to go on the social media,
Yeah.
test the market as early and as cheaply as possible.
Mhm.
And from there, hopefully you get a check in place and then you actually call the facility back and say, yeah, I want that venue booked for the 18th, whatever.
Yeah.
So far you haven't done anything that's, other than spend 20 hours and a couple $1,000,
Yeah.
but you already have a firm idea. And this point, you're going to probably double your marketing efforts, actually build some nicer ads, build a website for the first time, all of the things that you do to formalize it and make yourself look better, and then start talking about it and then start talking about it.
Mhm.
I believe the first 85 steps are marketing.
Yeah.
You've got to focus on getting the customer in and getting the feedback and learning what the parents, what in your case, the business owners,
Mhm.
whatever, the real estate agents that you're trying to attract, whatever, you have to go out there and test and see if, the response.
Yeah.
So
Yep, I agree. Yeah, I find so often, and going back to this, I don't want to be a dead horse here too much longer, but it's important that people get and grasp this concept. So many people have the idea, and the first thing they do is they go over to Fiverr, they get a logo design, they spend $150 on that, and they go and they get business cards printed. That's another $150, $300. Oh, I need a website now. That could be thousands, depending upon where you go and who you hire for it, and you have done nothing at this point. Oh, and you went and got the LLC because your attorney or your accountant told you that was the next step, right? Or the book.
And
So you've
even
got,
worse,
yeah,
if you come out of the corporate world, you've probably already got office space and a receptionist. I've met that person. And maybe like the logo t-shirt, but you're
yeah,
still not 100% sure what the model is.
mhm,
But have Stacy, call Stacy at my office and she'll get you in.
yeah,
Ugh.
yeah, 1,000%. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's literally putting the cart before the horse. I do love what you said though about marketing. My theory and my belief system is that marketing feeds sales, and without marketing, there is no sales. So
Definitely.
yeah.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about the School for Startups. What does it look like? How do you offer anything to your clients? What does the process look like once they come in and start doing business with you there?
We have a variety of ways that we can teach this philosophy. Of course, we do the one-on-one coaching and we have the online stuff and we do the big events and things like that. We also try to work with thousands of people at a time and take it to a larger audience. So right now I'm doing or trying to do start a program in Africa.
Mm.
I've done tons of work in India, probably done 20 different visits to India for multi-city tours and things like that. Have taught at IIT there in Mumbai 7 years in a row, getting this idea across that low risk entrepreneurship, low capital entrepreneurship is possible.
Hmm.
And it's important for people who have very little capital to know this message. And so we interact with the marketplace in any way that the market wants to get in touch with us. And then I go out there and try to sell big events.
Yeah.
And we do bigger or better with the big event sales than with the one-on-one consumer. It's more profitable, it's more entertaining, but we do, offer one-on-one coaching, which it could be, I already have a business and we're not making any sales yet. What's going wrong? Or someone who says, I don't have any idea what I want to do, but I want to be an entrepreneur. Can you help with that?
Yeah.
And so I've worked with both groups. It sort of grew out of my professor days. I taught at Georgia State University for 10 years and taught entrepreneurship there. And that sort of the curriculum that I did there became School for Startups when I got fired at Georgia State. We had a curriculum that was interesting enough that the local newspapers were writing about it, things like that. And I alluded earlier to a bet. I had a class that an entrepreneurship class, a night class for an MBA group. So these are smart 26, 27, 28-year-olds who probably work at Home Depot, Coca-Cola, other companies based here in Atlanta, and are getting an MBA on the side at night. And I was saying, the entrepreneurship stuff can be pretty easy. And they said, no, it's pretty hard. I said, it can be pretty easy. And they said, no, it's pretty hard. I'll even bet you. And so I made a bet that for $500, it was 5,000. I could start a business in any country and in any industry that they wanted. And this was right after 9/11. And so they thought it would be funny if I had to start a Pakistani furniture company. And that's where the Killam idea came from, the carpet that I was referring to earlier.
Yeah.
That was done over a bet, and it worked. I was able within the semester to prove that model would be a good one. And we went and hired a kid in Lahore to go into a flea market and take pictures of Killam carpets, the Oriental rugs that were available in the flea markets. And I would pick a rug and say that one, and then they would take it into a factory, cut it into the shape of, the shape needed. And we'd have a beautiful Queen Anne chair, a normal American chair with a 100-year-old fabric on it.
Wow.
And so that was a unique product. I stole that idea from a piece of luggage that I saw at a flea market in Santa Barbara a decade before that. I remember the luggage and I was like, ooh, this would make a good ottoman. There's my idea, stolen from a flea market, did it for under $5,000. And I don't like that product. I don't have it in my house.
Sure.
And so that became School for Startups. That's how the philosophy really works. You're an accountant right now. You don't tell me you don't have any interest that you want to start a business. There's no passion. So we need to start you in an accounting firm, and that may not be exciting and sexy, but can I introduce a new principle?
Sure.
There's this thing called the corridor principle.
Okay.
And it's really important for entrepreneurs. The idea that our career is like standing at the beginning of a long hallway. And when you stand in that hallway, you cannot see the rooms off to the side. Sometimes the doors are closed, or sometimes the angle is just wrong. But once you start down that pathway, you will be exposed to the things on the left and to the things on the right, because either doors open or because you just get exposed. That happened in your career. I mean, you were doing a car, and that led to the GPS thing that you invented or came up with, or whatever the verb is there. And that led you to moving to Austin, and that led to your current coaching career, and that led to the podcast. You've been going down the corridor. And so every time you do that, you get better opportunities to see your passion. And so if you're an accountant, let's start an accounting firm and get you going. And maybe a year or so, you'll discover, I had a client and he asked me for a little consulting, and now he wants me to be a CFO. And oh my gosh, the opportunity is so cool. And now you've discovered your passion, but you wouldn't discover it if you didn't start walking down the pathway.
Yeah. It's true. You got to go down that path. I often talk about it with clients too, where it's like, you're in a situation right now and you can't see 10 feet in front of you because, you're going through this thick fog. But if you do not take the next 10 steps forward, you won't be able to see what's further in front of you. So you have to just continue with the forward motion. It's a very similar scenario to what you got there.
Yeah.
I love it. So tell me well, first off, I got a question for you before we move on to this. Whatever happened with the Pakistani furniture company?
It did well. It had probably sold half of the products within 6 months, and it became time to either re-up and keep going or just to kill it and sell out the inventory, and that's what we did.
Got it.
I had no desire to run it on a long-term basis, but it's an amazing model, and I've explained it already. Find someone in Pakistan and here's another lesson, the United States consuls all over the world, our embassies have something called the Gold Key service. And it used to be $800. It might have gone up to $1,000. For $1,000, they will make a list of vetted businesses that they will attest to in that country that do whatever you need. So if you call the Pakistani consul's office and say, I need a list of furniture manufacturers in Pakistan that are legitimate, that have been there for 10 years, they will make that list for you. And that's what I did. And we faxed, in that time it was faxed, we faxed those companies, and 2 of them responded back saying yes, that they're interested in helping. And so again, all for $1,000 you can find a good partner somewhere around the world. I had no interest in pursuing it, but someone out there, please do it. Take that business. The first thing is start off with ottomans at $700, and that will cost you $100 to get that made. And then go to chairs, luggage with your leftover remnants, and pillows, tossed pillows. And if you go to my LinkedIn profile and hit my experiences and scroll all the way to the bottom of my experiences, you'll see samples of those chairs that are on my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah,
please check it out. They're beautiful.
Yeah, that's some advice that I've never heard before. Never even knew it was a thing. And I'm sure that some listener who's going to listen to this show, whether it's next 2 weeks or so when this goes live, or 2 years from now, because that's the beauty of podcasting. It's evergreen, lives on forever. They're going to hear that and go do something with it, which I think is fantastic. But I want to switch gears here before we wrap up today. And I want to talk about your radio show / podcast. And I was interviewed by you on there a couple of days ago. It was a great experience, but it's not very common. And I've done a handful of them over the last, I'll call it 3 or 4 years. It's not very common that you meet somebody who has a real live radio show. So tell me a little bit about how that came to, and what your goal is with your show.
Well, I started doing a podcast when my first book came out, and congratulations to your new book. I had fun on when I was interviewing you, forcing you to say the title of the book so I didn't have to say it. But un-F you, your business. I'll say it on your show, just not on my show. So congratulations on that. But anyway, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, I had a book come out, School for Startups with McGraw-Hill. Was blown away by how little they helped, how useless they were. And I realized I needed to start doing my own PR to promote the book, to get it to sell. And eventually it did. We got it up to number 9, I think, on the bestseller list, not in its category, but on all of Amazon. And it was all because I was doing podcasts, and I didn't use an agent. I spent every Sunday Googling and researching shows and contacting them, and ended up being on about, 250 shows in my first year to promote the book.
It's a lot.
And got a lot of practice, and I did some real radio back then, and enough people said, wow, you should have your own show. They said that, that I was good enough at it, that I had a talent. Eventually someone offered me a show. They said, we have a slot on a new internet radio station. It was a right-wing political talk radio station. And I was going to be business filler for when people got tired of talking about right-wing politics. And it lasted for about 6 months, but I started doing a podcast just like everyone else, playing the normal podcast game. But I also listen to the radio when I drive the car. I still am a radio listener. And for me, it seemed like the natural progression. Everything I tried to do, I want the adjective that goes with it. So I want best-selling book. And when I was a podcast, I wanted award-winning podcast. So I made sure I went out and got an award and everything. Well, to me, it still makes sense to be on the radio. And everyone talks about radio is dying and all of that. Well, You're right. It's dying. It only has 250 million listeners a month. You're right. It's dying. Well, I'm willing to ride that ride, that decline. It's not bothering me. But I'll tell you the real reason. Here's the super, super secret, that I'm also a speaker. And so I wanted the adjective that goes with it. And so if you're a podcaster, even if you're an award-winning podcaster, you're still a podcaster, which means you self-selected, which means no one has actually vetted you. Correct. And no matter how many audience members you have 100,000 listeners or something, some of the biggest influencers are some of the stupidest, worthless, most junk on earth. And as a speaker, I'm going into the speaking market trying to get clients like UPS. And I did 2 tours for UPS, and I've done 25 events for Wells Fargo over the years. And my list is all Fortune 500. They don't want a podcaster because a podcaster has not been vetted. So my goal was to always move into radio so that radio would validate me for my speaking career. So that when I am 2 sheets of paper laid in front of the boss, who should we hire to speak at this event? Well, this guy's a podcaster and he's won awards and blah, blah, blah. And this guy's on 25 AM FM stations around the country.
Right.
That old guy who's making that decision is probably going to choose the radio person.
Yeah.
And if I'm already doing a podcast anyway, why not do a radio version? And so I worked really hard for years to figure out how to get on to real radio. And there's some shortcuts out there. There's some steps you can take to get on AM, FM that's not really radio. And I could spend hours explaining all of that. But eventually it's just like anything else. You figure out the system and you get into one, and then, oh, now I get it. Now I know how to do it. And now I'm on 60, and we're adding about 2 a month, 3 or 4 a month right now, somewhere in that ballpark. Depends on how much time we spend on it. But it's a system, just like anything else.
That's awesome.
Follow up.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I love the fact that you mentioned that it is a system. Me being an ops guy, systems are everything. And I have the way that I explain to my clients, I have a thing we call the G3 method. You got to get it done, right? You got to get it documented. And then from there, you get it delegated. Right. And that's always been my version of, hey, this is how we start building the system. And this is how we scale the system. And you probably will attest to this too. I find that so many small business owners, entrepreneurs want to overcomplicate business. And it doesn't have to be that complicated. It can be pretty simple. So with that being said, I find a lot of people going back to the whole startup thing. They start the company, they get the LLC, they go out and they get the email address. They go out and they get the CRM. They go out and they get all these fancy pieces of software that, at one point in time, you're probably going to need them for your company to operate at the most efficient level. But in your opinion, if you start a new company from scratch today, what are the 3 base pieces of software that you need to function and function well?
Ooh, not much. Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and just the basics. After that, hopefully you're starting to make some money and you need Excel for that. But I think a business runs on Excel until it hits $1 million. And then you turn it over to a part-time CFO and you don't care what they do with it. They're going to use, QuickBooks or something like that, right? But as an entrepreneur, I'm not going to waste my time on that in the first $1 million. And you can run a business off of Excel. And, and other than that, I'm not as tech as you are and stuff. Your answer probably would have been Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And those might work out just as well. I start off with a 1-page business plan. I pump out lots of proposals. I give lots of talks. And so I need PowerPoint to make it look pretty and stuff like that. But those basic things, and I'd like to add something to one of my answers earlier. Sure. You asked, what are the early steps in starting a business? And I said 85 pieces of marketing, right? I do want to throw out there that step number 2 or 3, way high, is making sure you've got the good URL. And I do think that that's really important. When I was doing my computer business, I was computercamp.com.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've paid money to buy good URLs in my business. And so that is something that I think is mission critical. And then that's the name of your business, is whatever
Right.
URL you can get. I was originally the Entrepreneur School.
Mm.
And I hope, Tomas, that this makes you and all your listeners really mad. I hope to get some people mad right now. Listen to this. This is going to blow your mind away. I started the Entrepreneur School to teach online classes and stuff to, guess who? Entrepreneurs. And I got a letter one day, a cease and desist, saying you are violating our trademark. Entrepreneur Magazine tried to sue me for using the word entrepreneur. They claim that as their trademarked word, in that you're not allowed to say the word entrepreneur without sending them 12 cents or something. And if
Wow.
you put it in a book or a title or something like that, remember there was the Entrepreneur on Fire podcast, right? John Lee Dumas
Yeah.
or something like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
What is the name of that show now?
Yeah. It's changed.
EO Fire.
Mm.
He got, I don't know if he's ever talked about it, but
Right.
I bet you $100,000 that he got the exact same letter that I did.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to throw that up there too. Make sure that you get a good brand name, and that's really the .com that you can get. I'm still obsessed with .coms.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a firm believer that if you can't get the .com, then what are you doing?
You got to keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
And
seen
no
some.
hyphens and none of that junk either.
Yeah, it's got to be clean and good to go. So,
Yeah.
in your research, because listen, you and I both know that many of the common domain names that we want to go after right now, they're going to be taken, and oftentimes they're going to request a good chunk of change for the transfer of that domain. I mean, I've seen some 25,000, 99,000, 100, and then some. At what point does it make sense to go spend money beyond the $12.99 a year to go get the domain?
Well, I had to buy jimbeach.com, and it was fairly expensive because there's a very famous Jim Beach in the world. You remember the Freddie Mercury band Queen?
Sure.
That their business manager and their manager is Jim Beach, and he's still alive out there telling Freddie Mercury stories. And he was one of the characters in the movie that just came out, and they made fun of it. They said, Jim Beach, we're going to have to change your name to Miami because Jim Beach is the most boring name on earth.
Yeah.
To quote the movie. But anyway, I don't think I paid that much for it. Maybe $1,700 or something like that.
Yeah.
I did in the last 2 years secure a 5-character URL that I thought was, when I got it, I had to do a double check. I just got this for free, which is pod24.com. And the interesting thing that business does, Thomas, is that it takes podcasters and helps them get on the radio.
Love it.
And so that is just now starting, but I was able to buy that for $12. I also spent 100 hours looking.
Yeah. So what's the true cost if you know what you're worth per hour? And you don't have to tell me.
While I'm watching Game of Thrones and something like that, I'm second screening,
Yeah.
And so I don't mind doing that as mindless TV watching.
Yeah.
And, I around 9 or 10 when the kids go to bed, I switch to the TV and the laptop's still there going. So, and I also think while I'm driving and showering and mowing the lawn and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that's when we are our best thinkers.
Yeah, it's funny. I literally just had
you lose that the whole shaving thing though,
So I get it in the shower, and I call them shower thoughts. And I was listening to a podcast with Jim Quick, who's a big mindset guy, maybe 2 years ago, and he explained the science behind it. Oftentimes, when we go into the shower, let the warm water hit us and whatnot, our brain goes into a theta state, which is basically the same state you go into if you do heavy meditation. And when we get into this meditative state, it kind of opens things up and allows our brain to really work and or receive energy from whatever it is you believe in, God, the universe, whatever. And I've experienced that more times than I can count. So I just think it's fascinating and cool. And I wish more people would kind of accept that it's really a thing.
I've had many instances where all of a sudden I wake up and I'm 200 miles from where I thought I was. And I'm, 3 hours closer to my destination. I love a good long drive by myself.
Mhm.
Put the notebook in the passenger seat, throw a pen there for whatever thoughts you have. I think that's, if you're not doing that, you're missing the opportunity to truly let your mind go and let it explore. And also, I think that if you're not doing a long drive like that with your spouse every once in a while, that there's something true to the car conversation as being a good cleansing opportunity in a relationship. Most relationships need a car drive once a year.
Yeah, I think it's fair. That's a fair assessment. Jim, this has been awesome. I've picked up and learned a couple of things with my time spent here with you today, and I just want to say thank you so much for coming in and just being open with us. Let's the common podcast end here. Like, tell us where we can connect with you and learn more about what you do and how you help people.
JimBeach.com, schoolforstartups.com, schoolforstartupsradio.com. And I got to pitch the side gig too. If you go to Swimply, which is the Airbnb for swimming pools, Swim, Ply, Swimply. It's like Airbnb for swimming pools, and type in Georgia. We're the #1 pool in Georgia.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we talked about that the other day. So basically, you can rent a swimming pool from you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And have parties, and our backyard is worthy, and you can go, if you look at Swimply 30328, and you'll see the top pool there, the only one with over 100 reviews, and the one seen on CBS. We were on CBS even. You can see our backyard and how amazing it is, and we are usually booked through most weekends, all the hot days and stuff like that. And it's the definition of a side gig business. It pays a substantial part of the mortgage. The kids are responsible for a huge chunk of it. Send them out there to get ready. They have a checklist. Great.
Love it. I love it. I'm going to check it out myself. Sir, I appreciate your time here today.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast. Make sure you head over to stepitupentrepreneur.com and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Step It Up Entrepreneur Podcast.